Many cake decorators have issues with how to cover a square cake with fondant. This is because unlike round cakes, a square cake has angles. These angles can be very frustrating to straighten out and smoothen. In this video, we would be sharing some expert tips and advice from veterans that would help you cover your square cakes without issues. How to cover a square cake with fondant, tools and ingredients needed. Covering a square cake with fondant needs basically the same ingredients and tools as for every other shape of a cake. These tools and ingredients include the following: a fondant rolling mat and pin, fondant smoothers, pizza cutter or craft knife, sharp scissors, cake leveler or serrated knife, offset spatula, icing smoother, buttercream, fondant, vegetable shortening, cornstarch. How to cover a square cake with fondant. Procedure: prepare the cake for covering. Level off your cake with the cake leveler or serrated knife. Trim all the edges of the cake to ensure that you have sharp edges. Next, crumb coats the cake and leave to set. You can refrigerate for about 30 minutes. Lastly, cover the cake with a final coat of icing. Some decorators stop at crumb coating the cake. It's your choice. If you are covering more than one layer of cake, level each layer and fill with a frosting of your choice before starting on the crumb coating. Roll out the fondant. Place your fondant on the rolling mat and roll out enough to cover the cake. Make it about 1/8 of an inch. If you are working on a surface without a rolling mat, ensure that you dust the surface with cornstarch. Lift the rolled out fondant with your rolling pin and cover the square cake. Gently adhere the fondant to the top and sides of the cake. Pay extra attention to the sides. Smooth out the fondant. 1. Using your fondant smoothers on both sides of each edge, pinch the fondant together. Be careful not to tear off the top edge. 2. Next, using your scissors, cut off the excess fondant on the edges. Be careful with cutting off the excess fondant. Do so a little at a time so that you would not cut off too much. 3. Still using the 2 fondant smoothers, smooth out the sides of each edge of the cake until the excess fondant falls off. 4. Finally, use acetate fondant smoother to polish away any remaining rough edges. These steps are just the basic steps of covering a square cake with fondant. There are many other methods that cake decorators have perfected over the years. How to cover a square cake with fondant. Expert tips. Icing and fondant rules. 1. Do not roll your fondant thicker than 1/8 of an inch. If the fondant is too heavy, it would impact on the cake and be too difficult to work with. It would weigh on the sides, edges of the cake, and would not give you the desired sharp edges. 2. We mentioned earlier that some experts insist that only a thin coat of icing is needed on a cake before covering with fondant. This is because too much icing underneath the fondant would make it stretch and be slippery. It can really get cumbersome to work with. 3. Other decorators, however, do a full crumb coat and double coating before decorating their cakes. We have discovered that thin icing works better for us. You might want to experiment and find out what works best for you. 4. If you live in a region with high humidity, you might want to use more cornstarch to dust your work surface and fondant. Those who on the other hand live in dry regions would do well with work more with vegetable shortening. This would keep the icing from drying out while also giving it a glossy finish. 5. It is best to chill your crumb-coated and/or iced cake before covering with fondant. This would help you achieve sharp edges easier. Covering and smoothing. 1. Quickly smooth out the top and sides of your cake so that the weight of the fondant would not rest on the sides of the cake. 2. You can spritz your chilled cake with some water to help the fondant adhere better to the cake. Dry spots would cause your fondant to have air bubbles. But be careful not to spritz the cake with too much water, as this would make the fondant slippery. 3. When smoothing out your fondant on a square cake, ensure that you get the 4 corners nicely smooth before working on the sides. This would help to ensure that the fondant does not tear off from the corners. Conclusion. You do not have to remain scared of covering square cakes with fondant. Practice, they say, makes perfect. It takes the practice of the right procedure and methods to make perfect. You can start out with square cake dummies until you get comfortable enough to move on to real cakes. Bear in mind that your first time with a real cake might not be entirely flawless. However, practice with the cake dummies would have prepared for a little bit for what to expect. I hope you found this video helpful. Let us know in the comment section below. Do not forget to visit our site, www.cakedecorationproducts.com for more cake decoration content like this. Thank you for watching.